welcome to the Power Platform Show. As always, full show notes can be found in your favorite podcast app or go to podcast.nz365guy.com. Before we get started with today's guest, here's a quick message from our sponsors. Do you need a career coach? I've been working with Microsoft business applications for over 18 years and have coached many people to fulfilling careers in the space. If that sounds like something that interests you, please go to nz365guy.com/coaching. Now let's get on with the show. Today's guest is from Maryland in the United States. He's a senior manager at Accenture Federal Services. He loves working with technology. He also has this uncanny skill to recognize smart people and develop them. So it's exciting times to hear a story. You can check out the Stout family.com if you want to learn more about him. Jim Stout, welcome to the show.
Oh, man, I'm going to have to go take a look at that website. We put that up a long time ago. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate the welcome.
Yeah, the opening on it says, we're in Europe.
Yeah, not anymore. That was a long, we moved home in 2010. So that's, wow. It's just, that was something I did in, 2008 or 9, right? Like, I was lucky enough to get to live in Europe for a little while, but where
were you in Europe?
So we were in Germany. I lived in two different places, doing some work for the U.S. government. But I was in Stuttgart, just outside of Stuttgart, and then outside of a town in Germany called Kaiserslautern, if I could say that properly. It was good times. It was great living over there, especially for an American.
I've noticed that there's a growing Power Platform community in Stuttgart.
Is there?
Yep. Absolutely. As in, I set up this thing while I was in London before I moved home, and it was called the Power Platform Happy Hour. And Stuttgart was one of the places that set up the Stuttgart Power Platform Happy Hour, where they, met and discussed Power Apps and Power Platform.
Yeah, it makes sense. Boy, I'd love to find a way to go back someday.
It's a great country, isn't it?
It is. In Europe in general, I really appreciated the focus on quality of life, right? Sort of balancing work with living, right? So some Americans, when they first moved to Germany, like there are some things that they struggle with. For example, like dining out, right? You go down, there's a much slower pace of the meal. You sit at a table and you generally, at least the places we lived, you own the table for the night. Yeah. And some of my American friends would come over and they would have a hard time with it because they were accustomed to the pace of service in the United States, where the staff is coming to check on you every 5 minutes, and then you start to at some point begin to feel a little bit of pressure to leave because they need to turn the table. We didn't have that, and we adjusted to that really nicely. And so now my wife and I, we go out for meals, and I'm always apologizing because we'll sit for hours. It's just what we're used to, but it's good. That, and I miss the bakers.
The bakers.
I think the Germans are underrated bakers.
Interesting.
Every village, every town, there's a bakery. It feels like on every corner. Yeah, and just good like German whole grain breads. Not to mention the stereotypical things like pretzels and stuff, right? Like a butter pretzel's a guilty pleasure that I'll never forget, right? But
aren't they amazing?
We had a great time over there. Really enjoyed it. And I got to do it while doing work on Dynamics. So,
wow.
So a little bit of both.
Yeah, I got to wonder about European flour, whether it's different or wheat, because I just find all the bread products in Europe amazing.
I agree. I agree completely. And who knows what it is? I think we're probably going to talk about some of this later, but I have a mild obsession outside of technology with making pizza. I have a wood-fired pizza oven in my backyard.
Wow.
And so I'm always looking for new dough recipes. Of course, you got to make the dough, you got to make the sauce, you got to make everything.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the dough recipes say, you got to get the Italian 00 dough or flour to make your dough, which I do sometimes, but honestly, I haven't noticed that big of a difference between the two, but that may be blasphemous.
Did you build your pizza oven, or did you have it built? And if so, like how long do you heat it for how long, like if it wood fired, you from start to when you can throw the first pizza, and how long?
Sure. So I didn't build it. I bought it from a company in California, the other coast. But it's a 7,500 pound oven with special materials.
Totally.
But it does take time, right? Like it's a big oven. In theory, it could hold 5 pizzas at once.
Wow, that is big.
Yeah, they'd have to be really small pizzas. That's what the manufacturer says. But it's got like a custom tile job on it with like the Chianti rooster is sort of a logo on front of it.
Nice.
But it takes, I plan for 2 hours of burning time before we get started. So, in fact, I
go for 4 as in my mother-in-law has one. And I find 4 hours, and it depends on the type of wood you're using. If you're using a good hardwood, it's definitely less. But, when you can throw a pizza in 30 seconds, it's done, bottom and top just perfectly. It's like, it's such a good, it's a lovely pleasure, right?
It is. It's also a quest, right? Like just constantly trying to get the heat and the balance and everything right.
Exactly.
And hitting the right point in the dough and hitting the right point in everything. It's, thankfully the pandemic is receding somewhat here in the United States. So we were able to have people over our house on the 4th of July. So I had the opportunity to make 10 or 15 pizzas this past Sunday.
Wow.
So it was nice, right? And about half of them came out great, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing is pizza is one of those foods that you can just, I'm just going to use the word browse over it, but like you can keep, them coming out at a frequency that, is not too fast, but everyone, constantly has a hot piece in their hand and can enjoy it. It doesn't have to be served in one go type thing when you're doing it from home.
That's right. In fact, that's part of the fun, right? Is keeping it flowing, and people come over. We have conversations around it. I usually try to buy some unusual ingredients or invite guests to bring something they want to try to fire. Yeah. And, we'll just get together and try to make it. It was nice. Didn't get to do it at all last year in person, right? Because of the pandemic. But so being able to do it yesterday was good. In fact, last year I missed it so much that I set up this is a good Microsoft tie-in. I set up a Microsoft Bookings sign up. So all of my neighbors could sign up for 10-minute slots. And I gave them a menu where they could pick toppings and they could pick 2 pizzas. And with, separate toppings. And then one of my neighbors had a friend who was in the food business. And so gave me a big stack of boxes. And I made 42 pizzas in a night, just had people come up. It was just curbside. Right?
Incredible.
So my wife and my son and I were out there, and my son would box them and take them out and give them to people. But
it was so cool.
Yeah, it was a good time. I was allowed to exercise my, my obsession with making pizza, and everybody got a nice slice of pie. So
nice. Does pineapple have any right on a pizza?
It's funny. I had an all hands with my team at work, and that became a topic of discussion. My initial so pineapple has no place on any pizza that I will eat. Right.
I like it.
But and so my initial reaction when somebody on the team asked was absolutely not. And then I realized, no, that's not really true, right? Like I have a much more inclusive approach to everything. And I said, you know what? If you want pineapple on your pizza and you're coming to my house, bring the pineapple. I'll put it on the pie. I'll fire it for you. But I'm not gonna. It's not something that I would do. It's just not my jam.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Tell me about technology and your career journey up to this point.
Yeah. Well, so let's see. So I was born in it almost goes that far back, right? So I was a child. I was born in the late 60s, grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? So, for most, all the way up until about high school, computing wasn't really a thing, right? Like there was, they existed, but it just wasn't commonplace. I remember my dad had one of those Pong video games. I don't know if you remember those. They had little
totally. Yeah, just
way back, right? But then my freshman year of high school, the high school I went to bought 2 Apple computers, and they put them in the library, and you could sign up for time to go and work on the computers or play on the computers. And so I used to sign up at lunch to go in there and just see what I could figure out and see what I could do. And I just, was really fascinated and enthralled by the promise of what could happen doing computing. And that just continued, till today, I suppose you could say. But that sort of initial interest, and it was always, kind of a hobby. And then, going through high school, my high school had really not a very advanced data processing was what it was called at the time, data processing department. Like we actually, even then we were still our coursework, we were making punch cards, and they would take our punch cards and take them to a local community college and process them and bring us the results back. So it was not the most advanced, but I ended up going off to college and was studying electrical and computer engineering. And so that, computing stayed part of my coursework after that. But I never thought I'd be doing what I do today. I thought I was going to be designing. I grew up the son of an Army officer. And so I thought I'd be designing like weapons of mass destruction as an engineer, right? Or what have you. At least that's the word I always say. So I ended up going through, I was in the US, we have something called ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps. I got a scholarship using ROTC to pay for college. And so that was terrific. And then when I graduated, they decided that I was going to go on active duty in the Army, which I did. In the Army, especially back then, I think it's changed to some degree. As a young lieutenant, the jobs that they want you to have and the jobs that are good for your career are jobs leading troops out in the field. So they're, you spend a lot of time out in the woods. The closest thing I came to technology in that scenario was, driving in grounding rods into the ground to troubleshoot the, kind of the systems that we had available to us then. Wow. So it wasn't a lot of tech work. And because like I didn't see the ability for me to get into sort of technology and science and just that I've always been fascinated with trying to understand how things work. And I got to do some of that in the Army, and the Army was, really impactful to my life, and it was great, but I knew it wasn't where I was going to go for my whole life. So I ended up getting out after 3.5 years. This was during the Gulf War, sort of the wow. So after that war ended, the U.S. Department of Defense had a voluntary drawdown, and so those of us who were like ROTC or West Point grads were what you would call an obligated volunteer. So you volunteered for it, but you're now obligated, right? So they let us get out early. So that's why I should have served at least 4 years, but I was able to get out after 3.5. And then when I came back to Maryland and started applying for jobs, the jobs that all became available were computing, technology things. And so it's just been, Mark, I've had a good life and I've had a good career. I think I've had some nice successes, but it's not like I ever had a plan, right? I never imagined I was going to end up at Accenture where I am today. It was just, following one opportunity after another and just having a irrational refusal to quit anything, right? Just continuing to go. I
like that. I like that irrational refusal to quit. That's cool.
Yeah, I think there were just certainly times in my life, like looking back on it, like if I was counseling me, looking back maybe 15, 20 years ago, and I described to myself like what it was I was doing or what, and how, what the situation was, I probably would have counseled myself to go find another job, but I'm glad I didn't, because it all worked out, right? It all worked out in the end.
Totally. So how did you get into Microsoft business applications?
Yeah. So so after I got out of the Army, I started just doing government contracting for a little while, and then went to work for a law firm for a little while, set up a document management system for a regional law firm in Maryland and DC. And then I got recruited by this tiny little consulting company that was doing document management for law firms, and I went to work for them. And at that time, we were doing Novell NetWare implementations.
Of course.
So then we were doing Sybase SQL Server on top of Novell NetWare, and that's what I was doing. I was doing PC Docs Open implementations using Sybase SQL Server sitting on top of Novell NetWare, and then Microsoft and Sybase had been working together, and there was this split where Microsoft sort of took their version of, what was originally Sybase and ran with it. And they started to release it on top of NT. And so we began to do some experimentation and implementations of our document management system on top of Microsoft SQL Server on NT. And then once we did that, then, okay, now you've got Windows servers installed to host the SQL Server. We began to ask the question, well, why do we need Novell, right? Because it was at the time it was file services and authentication, but we didn't need it anymore. So we fairly quickly started transitioning away from Novell NetWare, even though NetWare still had some superiority at the time relative to Windows, but there were certain things about it that were better. But it was Windows was good enough. Right. And so once that happened and we made that shift, right, I really never looked back. Right. So we were all in on Microsoft all the time with any products that they released. And then there was a turn of events. I think you've spoken to some of my former colleagues, guys like Aaron Elder. We had a little spinoff company from that company named iCommunicate that was sold to Microsoft as part of their efforts to build the original version of CRM. Aaron was one of those guys. And so we stayed involved with our friends who went off to Redmond to work for Microsoft. And as CRM was being developed, we of course did everything we could to get involved. And then eventually, after CRM was released, the partners and I got together, and up until that point, our elevator pitch would have been, we do stuff with computers, right? Like it was really nondescript. It's just sort of how we evolved, and literally we would have done anything if you were willing to pay us at the time. And we realized that wasn't a great growth strategy, and we needed to really zero in on something. And so we sort of made the decision that we were going to focus all in on Microsoft CRM and really de-emphasize everything else we did. We had a really strong systems management business at the time, and we that stayed in place and continued to do its thing. But really most of our energy was all in on CRM, and it worked. Right, a few years later, Aaron Elder and Jason Hunt, who were on the Microsoft product team, after CRM 3.0 shipped, decided it was time to go back out in the market, and so they came back and joined us as partners, and we grew from there. But
so is this a Centium?
So it became a Centium. It's a long, sordid story, right? So the little company that I got recruited to work for in, going back to 1994, that was doing legal consulting. That company was the company that spun off iCommunicate, sold it to Microsoft.
Gotcha.
The guy who founded that company left and went to Seattle and worked there for a while. Left me and a couple of other guys running that little company that was left behind. That company then really, without his focus and without the energy that you need from an owner, just wasn't doing great, right? And so at one point, me and the two other guys kind of got together and said, we either need to be all in and make this work, or we just need to leave. And we weren't willing to go all in and do all the work as, employees or minority shareholders. So we bought out the company from the guy who originally founded it. And then that became a company called Invoke Systems. There's a little more complicated than that, but that's effectively what happened. And then that's the company that Jason and Aaron joined as partners. So then there were 5 of us. Invoke was the company, and we grew. We had a lot of success with CRM because we were all in, and because Jason was amazing at selling it, and Aaron was incredible in implementing it. And so we started having success there, and then we were looking to bring on some more senior guys, and we interviewed this guy named David Kohar, who I think you've spoken to. And,
totally, know David well. Yep. Yeah.
So we made an offer to David to have him come on board and work with us at Invoke. And when David went back to Ascentium, because he was working at Ascentium at the time, to tell the partnership there that he was leaving to come work for us, they said, hey, no hard feelings, but if you don't mind, ask those guys if they'd be interested in being acquired. And we hadn't really even been thinking about it at that point. But then after a couple of months, that happened, right? So Ascenium acquired us. We formed the national CRM practice for Ascenium, and that went pretty well for us. We had some more growth. It was a lot of crazy times. Now, at this point, I had already moved to Germany, so I was living in Germany, driving the business that we operate there, selling a dynamics-based solution known as TMT, to the government over there. And so, while living over there, we sold our company to Ascenium, and then that went for a couple of years. And then still while living over there, we then sold the Ascentium National CRM practice to Avanade. Right. So I sold my company twice while living in Germany. Wow. With all that stuff happening in Europe. Now, Mark and Michael and Aaron and Jason did most of the lift on both of those deals, but it was still kind of a weird situation to be in. So that's kind of the lineage, right? So I ended up at Avanade, and I was responsible for all the federal CRM business in Avanade at that point in time, and then eventually we took the Avanade federal practice and effectively moved it to Accenture Federal. Just has to do with a bunch of government, of course, compliance related things, right? It just made sense.
So does Microsoft still have a finger in the Avanade pie? 17% or something? I can't remember what I saw last time I looked at it.
Yeah, they do. I don't I don't recall the exact percentage. I want to say it's like 90-10, like 90% Accenture, 10% Microsoft. Something along those lines. My understanding, this is all before my time, but my understanding was originally it was more of a 50-50 or closer to a 50-50 split. But over time they decided that it made more sense for Accenture to have most of the skin in the game.
That they put together then Microsoft Consulting Services, right? So I assume that was their originally. It was they didn't want to do. I assume that they didn't want to do consulting, and that was the reason. And then Microsoft Consulting Services. That's quite a large organization now in its own right.
No, it certainly is, and that may very well be part of it. I think the other part of it was that there was a desire to have an incentive structure that took this global technology consulting firm Accenture and gave them significant motivation to grow a Microsoft-based technology practice around the world, right? And having having more of an ownership stake in Avanade. And again, I'm just speculating, based on a few years having worked there. So I take everything I just said with a grain of salt, right?
Yeah, totally. So one of the things I want to talk to you about is in our discussions we talked about identifying top talent. What are the patterns you've seen over your career when you've come across people that you're just like, wow, this person's got the goods, and I want to work with them. I want to get them on my team, that type of thing. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Like, and it's, to some degree, you could say, it's the old saying, like, I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it, right? But I think that there probably are some characteristics. I'm thinking about a couple of the people that just sort of caught my eye. Like there's one of the first things is maybe a service mentality, right? Like there were people that I was fortunate enough to work around before we hired them. So I got to sort of see them in action while they were taking care of customers. And, it's technology and they're talking to customers, and they were, they had just this service mentality about trying to manage people in the right way. And these are oftentimes they're people who, like, maybe in college or in high school, they worked in restaurants or they worked in the service industry somehow. So they have just sort of experience on how to deal with the public. And I think that kind of makes a difference in your ability to deal with people who maybe are a little frustrated, right? Like, because, a lot of times in our jobs, people aren't calling us because everything's great. They're calling us because things are not right. So sort of witnessing that, I think that's certainly one of the things that catches my eye. So it's just sort of the ability to talk to people and make them feel valued and cared for, right? It's important. I think another trait is just curiosity, right? Like, so people where it's not good enough just to know what the answer is, but to know why, right?
Nice.
Like, so there was a guy, I was just sort of watching him manage backups, and he wasn't just saying, where's the list of tapes I need to swap? Like, he wanted to understand what the rotation scheme was and why, right? Because it made it easier for him to get into it, right? So it's a task that could have been really mundane, but it was something that he really paid attention to and cared about. And that guy ended up becoming one of my partners, right? So he was terrific. So just sort of this curiosity, trying to understand things. And it's not just a curiosity about the technology, right? Like, it's a curiosity about people, right? So kind of goes back to that service mentality. Like, somebody calls you and they have an issue, like asking questions, wanting to understand why it matters, trying to understand like what is really going on, like what's the problem behind the problem, right? Like that kind of curiosity. I mean, that ends up manifesting in a lot of different ways, right? So if you really understand what's behind the issue or what's driving the person to ask you the question, you're going to do a much better job of figuring out what the best solution is for that person, right? Like, they may be asking you to do a particular thing, but the reality is they're asking you to do that because they've already tried to solution it themselves. Like, so they think that's the solution, right? But if you understand what it is, then you're going to be much better equipped to really help them solve in maybe a more lasting or meaningful way. And then in general, just like, that curiosity about technology, like being like when you talk to them about the latest version of Power Apps or the latest innovation in Power Automate or the latest, it could be the latest iPhone. I'm going to give a negative example, but I was interviewing a guy, and he said he was passionate about cars and he loved Teslas. And loved Tesla is what he said. And I happen to own two, right? So I'm like, that's great. I love them too. Tell me, what did you love? Right? And all he could talk about was the stock price, right? Like, he didn't really care about the innovation that was happening, and and how there were things that were changing the world. It just, like, all of a sudden I realized, like, he cared about the stock, right? So it didn't work. But if he had gotten into the advancements in battery manufacturing or whatever, like that, I would have been much more tuned into. So I think it's important. And I guess the final thing about people is, and I realize I'm talking a lot about this.
This is good.
And like I said, like, it's usually just something you subjectively pick up without having thought about articulating any of this. But there's just sort of a sense of commitment to getting a job done and getting it done right and for the right reasons, and not just kind of phoning it in and putting in your 8 hours and getting it done. That's not to say that I want people that are going to work all day and all night all the time, right? But just there needs to be a commitment to getting a job done and getting it done right, getting it done right, not walking away from things. It kind of picks up that you can pick up if you have the luxury of being around people over time, or sometimes during interviews, you can pick it up just in asking them questions about prior work, right? But
I like it. So you get them on your team, and they're in your organization. How do you then, because often, great talent, what I've noticed, there's also a restlessness that comes with that, in that, they want to do their best work, and if they feel they're not doing their best work with you, they're going to be looking to do their best work with somebody else. So how do you create, if you like, that culture, that stickiness, that the opportunity that they want to stay with you for a good long while?
Yeah, it's a constant struggle, and you're right. It is especially an issue when you have just really high performing people, because they need to have the ability to feel engaged and feel like they're stretching themselves to achieve both career wise, but also just doing interesting work. There's no magic to it, right? But the way I look at it is, when you've got people on your team that are great, figuring out what it is that they're great at, what is it that makes them strong, makes them feel strong while they're doing it, and finding ways to get them in a position where they can do that, and then giving them responsibility and authority, right? So, I've had people who've stepped up and said, Jim, I'd like to take over a project. There was one in particular, it was a very large customer. And it was, I thought, wow, this is a little bit of a stretch for this guy, but he was high potential. And so I gave it to him. And he took it over from me, actually. And he started doing things that were pretty different than the way I did things, pretty different than the way I would have done things.
Yeah.
But I realized that I needed to give him the room to get out there and grow and to experiment. And not everything he did went perfectly, but it all went well enough. And some of it went much better than I ever would have imagined.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so just kind of giving him that room to grow, giving him the authority, and then trying to get out of the way. Right. Because the last thing they want is me looking over their shoulder every day. Right. If they're really high performing, they want to feel that sense of ownership. That way, at the end of the day, they can accomplishment. And then it's on me to try to create the space where they can do this and do it in a safe way. Right. So knowing, one of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about and even explicitly talking about with people is, I've got your back. Right. Whether that means like you're out there on a project and things are starting to go wrong and you need help, like don't hesitate to reach out. Right. Because I'm going to jump in and help. I'm going to pull in other people to help, and we're going to get it done, and we're going to do it without retribution. Right. Like, because I recognize that, it's like people often grow the most when things don't go well, right? And you learn the most about them and about yourself, in fact, when things don't go well, right? When something goes wrong, like how do you respond to it? So giving people the ability to kind of be put in that position, but without there being catastrophic consequences, right? Whether that's me and they're helping them. Also, we need to make sure that we're protecting our clients while we're doing it, right? So I can't,
of course,
you can't have that happen. But so finding that balance where you can give people the kind of the room to get in there and try things. Back in the early days when we were in that small consulting company, I used to talk about people would have their consulting moment, right? Where they were, they used to be in IT where they were just doing well-defined tasks. And then we would put them out there in front of clients and they would start doing work, and something would happen. This is the old days in Novell, right? A server would crash and you got to rebuild the file system, or you had a irate client, and, whatever it was where they, something went horribly wrong. But they get through it. Yeah. Right. And once they've kind of gotten through it, there's a difference in the person, because they now have a certain level of confidence that, if I could survive that, right, and at the end, everything turned out okay. Like I can survive anything. Right. And so the level of confidence they have going forward, I think just really improves. And I think that's a big part of what it means to be a consultant is to be able to be confident and to instill confidence in your clients. Yeah. And if you're not confident in yourself, you're never going to get there. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That just sparks off the scenarios that, of course, that I've had that have been negative when a consultant hasn't been, confident in their own right, or, sure of themselves, and how it can unsettle a customer very quickly.
Yeah. And right. They don't have any, they're going to start second guessing everything.
Totally. Yeah. Totally.
And things that might have been okay will end up not going well, because the flip side to it is you got to be humble, right? So there's this humility in recognizing that you don't know everything, right? So don't, the flip side to that coin is, right, like, don't make up answers if you don't know the answer, right? Like, totally. So part of confidence is having the confidence to tell the customer that you don't know the answer, right? Yeah. But you'll find out, right? And I think it actually is another thing I teach sometimes, right? So sometimes the best way to make people believe in you is when you are able to tell them that you don't know the answer, and you'll find out, right? Yeah. If you're constantly just trying to be Johnny on the spot with the answer every time, people are at some point they may begin to have doubt, right? So it's humble confidence maybe is a way of thinking about it. A little bit of both.
I like it.
Or confidence with humility.
Tell me about grad development or grad programs. What's your involvement been in them, and what have you found is effective in taking, somebody green out of university, finish their degree, and getting them up to becoming a high-performant consultant?
Yeah, that's an interesting question for me. Until I came to Accenture, the truth is I didn't have a lot of experience hiring college grads. We used to joke that, like, we wouldn't hold it against you if you had a college degree, but we certainly weren't looking for it, right? Like, yeah. Back when we were a small company, and the kinds of stuff that we were doing, we didn't have the kinds of government contracts I work on today, where there is a lot of kind of labor category requirements that you have to meet. But since coming to Accenture and Really it took us a little while on my team to start embracing the college hire program that Accenture has. And what I found is that, what we're finding is a lot of really high potential people that are coming in that just take a little time to kind of come up to speed on what it is that we do. And but if you're willing to put in the time and to give these people the time and energy that it takes, within a year or two, they are just absolutely outstanding and phenomenal employees for us. But it has the trick for us has been trying to create the environment where we've got space where we can bring people in, fresh out of college, or maybe just 6 months to a year out of college, and giving them room to grow within the team and be supported by people. And that when we do that, right, and give them that time to grow, that they all have almost always become really key players for us. Within a couple of years. I don't know that I have any secrets to it, other than I think it's similar to the rest, right? Like identifying people's strengths, giving them opportunities to learn and grow, and trying to find ways that you can give them responsibility as fast as you can. Because I think people thrive when you give them the confidence of giving them some responsibility to handle tasks on their own. And I think that gives them kind of the motive and the incentive to really try to grow on their own. If you take them and you just plug them in on sort of rote tasks, which, sometimes you have to do, but they're not going to grow as fast. We had a college hire on one of our projects. It was a Dynamics project that just through a variety of reasons, he ended up being kind of the primary person interfacing with the customer on a daily basis on a very high profile, like front page of the Washington Post kind of project.
Wow.
And, I spent a lot of time on the phone with him over time, just with kind of counseling sessions, just because it was really difficult for him. Right. And he needed, sometimes he just needed to talk and vent, but sometimes he needed advice. But it was, remarkable to some degree. We were lucky because he really was high potential. But I could also argue that he grew as a consultant way faster because of this crazy set of circumstances that led him to be in this position where he's now the go-to guy who knows this client's business processes inside and out. And that project was a tremendous success, in large part because this college hire, seriously, it was his first job out of college, went through his onboarding with us, and then had just a really key role on the client. He was backed up by a lot of really senior people in the end. But the exposure that he had was just huge. And so I'm a big believer in giving people responsibility and letting them run. But
I like it.
Yeah, because they'll grow. The other thing I try to push with all of these folks, though, is train. I do try to take advantage of as much training as I can. Within Accenture, we've got lots of capabilities. Like we do, as a firm, everything, right? It's probably difficult to find a technology that we don't touch, right? So within our technology growth platform, we have training budgets, and there's incentives that we push for trying to get people into training, and that training budget is spread across all technologies. But our sort of Microsoft team has been number one or number two for when you look at it, kind of adjusted on a per capita basis for sort of training engagement, and it's because it's just something we push, right? I think you always need to be, what's the Stephen Covey thing? Sharpen the saw, right? Totally. Always need to be sharpening the saw. And so we push hard to try to get people into training, whether that's instructor led or some of the self-study stuff, or we do lunch and learns, we do all that kind of stuff. And especially with these college hires where they're coming in with really, they're like sponges, right? Like they've been going through 4 years of university where all they've been doing, where they've learned how to learn, right? And so the best thing we can do is, continue that, but target it in some technologies that we care about. So we've been pushing them through a lot of sort of Power Apps training over the last couple of years. We've had some good success with that. Even won an internal award at Accenture for it. So
wow, so good. Nice. Any books that you recommend for grads and or consultants, or any kind of external resources that you would highly recommend, like when people seek you out for advice on how do they get to the top of their game as a consultant? Yeah, no, I don't. I don't really have a book that I recommend in that context.
I tend to kind of, there are some books that I talk about a lot with my team. So, one of them is getting a little long in the tooth, but the message is still really relevant for what we do. And that, I don't know if you've read The Innovator's Dilemma.
No.
It's a number of years ago, but we built a product that we sell to government customers that's based on Dynamics and now Power Apps. And we're now at a point where we are the enterprise solution for a very large set of customers. And I live every day worried that there's going to be a small upstart that's going to be like I was 15 years ago. And they're going to come in and disrupt us, right? The whole notion of disruptive technologies, I think, is something that's really relevant for anybody who's got, particularly if you're in a solution space where you're selling a product or a solution, an ISV solution over and over again. But from a consulting standpoint, I don't really have, I think the basics, honestly, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, had a big impact on me. I read it 25, 30 years ago. Right. But it's still something that I think has got some relevance. And then I do read a lot, listen to a lot of books. So the Good to Great series and because I think there were a couple of ones after that, I think were all pretty meaningful and good for me. But again, it's not something that I have recommended to a bunch of people.
Yeah. I have a lot of people that listen to the show that are in some shape or form, whether they're employed by the company they work for, but their role is that of, app maker, builder, consulting, where in some shape or form is absolutely part of their role, right? They're understanding customer needs, they're, architecting solutions and building outcomes. Any recommendations that you would have for those type of folks so that they can play at the top of their game?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that, and this maybe isn't answering the question directly, but that notion of curiosity, right? Yeah. If you're not interested and curious, and if you don't get excited about the next release of the whatever the technology is that you work on, whether it's the Power Platform or something else, you might be in the wrong business, right? Yeah. It should be the kind of thing that it's not just work for you to sit down and tinker with the latest release of whatever the tech is, right? Obviously for me right now, it's the Power Platform, but every chance I get to hear what's coming out, I get genuinely excited when Microsoft does their launches, right? To see what happens. And for me, that's true. And it's not just for the Power Platform. I don't know about you, but I've already got Windows 11 running on one of my machines, right? It took me
totally.
Took me about a day to say, all right, I'm doing it, right? Have to. Now it's not on all my machines, right? Because I can't do it on my Accenture machines, anyways. But but I think if you're going to be doing this kind of work, and the great thing, to some degree, I wish I was restarting my career now. There's never been a better time to be a to be a technologist, right? Because there's so much you can do, and there's so much happening, and you don't have to be a coder to do things that are really interesting and innovative. Because I never really was a developer, right? A coder. I spent a tiny bit of time doing it early in my career. I was much more I called myself a systems engineer, right? But I was much more of an installer, a tinkerer, a troubleshooter. And today, the things that my role has changed a little bit. I'm less hands-on than I used to be in my day-to-day delivery, but I spend a lot of time working with my teams as they're implementing. And when I see what my team has been able to do, without writing a single line of code, it's just insane what's possible, and it's really exciting. And so I think kind of having that curiosity, the other thing that's changed, Mark, is the availability of learning for no cost, right?
Totally right.
When I got my original Microsoft certified systems engineer certification, right? It was big stacks of books that you had to read.
Six exams or something back in the day, right? And each of those would be a week's worth of training minimum of classroom learning, right?
Yeah. No, it's totally. I ended, just side story, I was back in the early days working for that little company. One day the owner walked into my office and he said, "We need an MCSE. We need one by next week." Or no, he gave me 2 weeks. So I took a week off, went up in the mountains, and I had the stack of books with me. And
wow.
I luckily I'd already been working in the technology, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I had practical experience. So it was really more about learning, like, what's the Microsoft answer to everything, or
Exactly.
and so I would study for a day, the next day go take a test, and then I would study another day, the next day go take a test, and
Yeah.
I pretty much got the whole MCSE done in a week. But
Yeah.
but that
NT4 was my first exams, NT4 related exams.
Yeah. I can't remember if I was NT4 or NT351, but it was right.
Wow.
Right in that. It's been a while, but it was right in that time frame. But today, right, like, go to Microsoft Learn, right? Like, go to YouTube, like the Channel 9, like there are so many different resources that are available, and MVPs and companies across the country that are like publishing content that's free, that is just so valuable. It's insane, right? So if you're genuinely interested, I have a friend, friend of the family. His little sister, just longer story, but we basically adopted her just virtually, right? Well, 'cause she went to my son's high school, and so he though was a sound engineer working for Disney. Originally, he was up in. He originally was doing work in New York on Broadway, but then ended up going to work for Disney. Was basically an Imagineer, helping Disney with the shows and the various events and installations. He, as an Imagineer, like, decided that they needed to track some of the project-related work that he did, and just knew that they had Office 365 and they had Power Apps because of it, and just started learning on his own and using content freely available. So if you think about this, he was technically minded, right? Because he was an engineer, right? But it was more audio stuff, right? So it's a completely different kind of thing. But he just really took to it. Now he's doing technology consulting, working for a major tech company, doing Power Apps work, right? Because eventually, right, doing that work from within the group that he was in at Disney didn't make sense anymore, and so it was he went out and started doing it. I just think it's so cool that somebody could just do it, right? Like, and not coming from that tech background. Just really
so
cool.
good.
So much. Never a better time to do it. Like, I highly recommend it to anybody getting into it, because it's amazing. And then if you decide that you do have coding aspirations and skills, like, you're like, there's no limits, right? Like, we were meeting with a client this morning, me and one of my technical architects, and we were kind of walking through the customer's requirements. And it was, my takeaway as I walked away from it was, like, this was probably completely doable without writing a single line of code, right? Not counting PowerFX, and then talking to the tech arc on my team afterwards, he's like, yeah, no, we could. He says, you're right, we could. He says, the truth is, though, if we do this, we're going to write some code, because the complexity of the Power Automate sort of cycles that we're going to have to go through to implement this is going to get pretty intense. And so at some point, it makes sense to crack open Visual Studio and write a plugin, because it's going to simplify the solution and make it so much easier to maintain over time. So I love that we've got the ability to have both, right? Like, we still have a definite need for coders to take these solutions to the next level. But there's still so much we can do with people that would have been just like me back in the day. So I think it's great.
So good. I always like to wrap up these sessions with a few quickfire random questions.
Okay.
So these are off the wall, quickfire. Let's see what you can come up with. Okay, first one. What's something about you that surprised people when they first hear it?
Okay. I was a club DJ working in underground nightclubs in several cities and states in the United States before I started doing tech consulting, and I even continued doing it while in the Army.
That's so cool. So cool. Would you rather win a Grammy or an Oscar?
I honestly have no preference. So
same.
Yeah.
Last one. In what way do you feel your childhood was happier than others?
Yeah, I had a big fun family, right? So I was one of 4 kids, and my father was Army, so we moved around. And so my brothers and sister and I, we fought, but oh my God, did we laugh a lot. And so having that kind of built-in group of kind of friends as we were moving around was terrific. And living as part of a military community was also something that was really special.
Awesome.
The number of friends we had and the facilities we had available to us was really terrific. It was great.
Oh, cool. So cool. Is there anyone you'd recommend to come on the show in future as a guest that have a good story to tell?
I think you've already talked to all of my favorite people, right? So, my partners, Jason and Aaron, like if you haven't talked to Jason, like he's such a character. He'd be a ton
Jason's
of fun.
a hard person to get hold of. I mean, I think I'd do better stalking his wife's new spirits company that she's selling.
Right.
I see it pops into my feed every now and again. Must be on LinkedIn, I assume, that she's obviously created some spirits, which is a little side hobby of mine as well.
And she's got a tech background too. That might be your angle in, right? And Jason might join just to help support her, right? So, well,
if you can get me a recent introduction to Jason, that would be fantastic. Because, as I say, I first met him in person very early on in my career in Australia, where he was evangelizing heavily for Microsoft. In
that was his job. He was the product evangelist, I think was even his title for a while. He's a lot of fun to talk to, and he's a character, right? So he'll have lots of fun opinions.
Awesome.
I think he'd be great to talk to.
Well, thanks very much. We'll make sure we tag you in this and get you notified when this all goes live.
All right. Spark, it was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Applications MVP, Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 guy. If there's a guest you'd like to see on the show, please message me on LinkedIn and let me know why you think it would be good to get this person on. Please like and subscribe in your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to leave a review, go to podcast.nz365guy.com, and I'd love to get your feedback. Anyhow, stay safe out there and see you next time.